Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to another installment of the Healing Brothers podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Brandon Jones, and I'm with the legendary other co-host, Sam Simmons. How's it going today, Sam?
I told myself I wasn't going to have my typical response to this. You know,
How how about the extraordinary Sam Simmons? Maybe I should just give you a different, adjective every day, every time we do this.
yeah. You know, yeah. Okay, whatever, whatever. What's up with you?
Not much. It is a cloudy, windy day here in the Twin Cities. As you know, we can go from having 60-degree weather to having 32-degree weather in 24 hours. So, it's one of those types of things that are happening. But a lot has been going on in our state and around the states when it comes to racism. So, as a black man, I'm just maintaining to the best of my abilities. But it's been a very emotional, draining week for many people, many people, especially many black folks.
And not even just black folks. I
Sure.
mean, which when we're talking about things like trauma based on race related trauma, uh, it ends up being an interesting conversation, especially here in America. You know, with the institution of racism here in America, um, and in people's um, reluctance a lot to really want to hear certain people's experience uh, due to their racial experience uh, here in America. You know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
you have, because we know this racial kind of institution has been broken down in a real kind of all or nothing, black and white, and then everything else kind of fits in the middle.
Mhm.
Kind of deal. And one of the things in doing this work, I try to avoid as much as possible is comparing trauma, right?
Right.
Whose trauma is worse, and that kind of thing, and that's a interesting debate that happens when people are experiencing their trauma from from their point of view, right?
Right.
Especially around racial trauma. But we'll get more into that. Like you said, here locally, um, we're dealing with the aftermath, or it's not even aftermath yet. The Chauvin trial, uh, the police officer who had his knee on the neck of George Floyd and took his life, and the developments around that, which is, I think, um, is interesting from the standpoint that it's very triggering for Black folks, right?
Right. Right.
Um, um, this week has been full. I did a radio interview this week, and then I had my own radio show this week, and we actually addressed that issue, which was interesting. The conversations were interesting on the radio show. I threw out a statement that you got the people in power, you got media, who keep bringing up the fact that it's the foremost thing on people's minds, and it's like,
Mhm.
really? Okay, if it wasn't, it is now.
Mhm.
And it's interesting how within this system of racism, how the systems will try to identify or clarify how Black folks think in the most basic and simplest ways, right? Um, Even with the COVID-19, the vaccinations and all these other, they got uh, uh, information, when you don't bother to continue to understand a group of people and really talk to them and more, and not just the usual suspects, you really don't get a good handle on what's really going on with folks. I know that with my clients, I bring up the Chauvin trial. It's like, why are you
What?
bringing that up?
Yeah. Who's Chauvin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, they're gonna, their response is they're gonna do what they're gonna do anyway, right? You know, I'm just trying to maintain.
Right.
I'm trying to do my groups. I'm trying to, take care of my family the best I know how. Uh, uh, you had one young man who was just talking about, I'm just waiting to see my stimulus check. You
Yep.
know, you know, and and I'm not saying that's either good or bad. I do think that if you are focusing so much on this Chauvin trial from point to point, that could be unhealthy. You know what I'm saying? Because it could be depressing, the emotional up and down swings that, especially what's going on here. You got a city council and a mayor who, you know, are in my eyes are acting in a way of fear,
Hmm.
making some real interesting um, decisions that people are questioning. Even the average person are questioning,
Hmm.
like um, the giving out the money, the $27 million to the Chauvin family. Um,
No, to Floyd's family.
yeah, the Floyd's family. Yeah. Oh
Yep.
yeah. Don't let me make that mistake. Oh my God. I get beat up through the internet. Okay. Yeah. To the Floyd's family. Um, and how that might affect the outcome. Because I mean, the folks who called in on the radio show, one man basically said uh, he believes once they did that, the trial was over. Right?
Yeah.
He
Hmm.
was like, oh, he's he, it's over. They he's gonna
It's
be
gonna win.
found not guilty,
Yeah.
right? That matter of factly, it wasn't no, you know, over the top emotion or whatever. You could tell that he kind of thought it through and that kind of piece. And then I had one woman who called in she says, yeah, I'm paying attention to the trial, but her question, can you tell me why are black men so angry that they want to kill each other?
Hmm.
She says, I'm a mother out here and I'm trying to figure out, yeah, I'm gonna follow the trial and I want, the outcomes to be, in a way where we get justice and that kind of stuff. But
Hmm.
what's going on? And she said, what's going on with our babies? That life is so uh um you know has so very little value, right? So the community itself has multiple layers of things that are thinking about that. Again, the media puts it on. Da, 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 we're gonna follow the trial from the beginning to end, and this is the place you need to check to keep up on this, and it ain't like that. And the ones that's like that for, I worry about sometimes, right?
Right.
Because the interview I did was I was called upon, what are we going to do? How people who how do we deal with this being triggered by this trial and the information, constantly bombarded by the information? It's like, one is you got to have a plan to deal with this, right? You got to decide how much time you want to spend in this. I probably stay, even though I'm doing this show on you know Facebook and YouTube and stuff. I don't check that often. I try not to check it too often. right?
Mhm.
I because there's so much stuff going on. I need an emotional break, and I guess the other thing is realize I need an emotional break because this is what I do, right?
Mhm.
And finding spaces to get away, finding spaces just to enjoy my family or whatever. When I talk to folks, it's like sometimes trying to avoid all of this coming at you, you need a plan. And I know it ain't easy when we're still on the back end of the shutdown. With some nice days over the last few days. So I noticed people were getting out and trying to
Mhm.
enjoy their lives and that kind of stuff. So that's what So you got the racial, because this case is um some there was the Chauvin's attorney said this is not about race, you know, you
Okay.
know, yeah, and yeah, and it's always so interesting when folks want to disregard race when it's convenient,
Mhm.
right? When it's not feeding their narrative, that kind of thing. And then, nationally, we have the Asian community experiencing uh, ongoing trauma that probably has been minimized
Mhm.
because they are Asian, right? And then you have the massive, uh, uh, um, basically, execution of
Yeah.
uh, uh, over the past week at three different massage parlors in Atlanta. Majority of I think it was 8 people, and there was 6 of them were Asian women and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And the folks are trying to figure out if it was uh, um,
A hate crime.
hate crime,
Yeah.
right? But you went to 3 Asian-owned saunas, right?
Mhm.
And the fact that they were so quick. Since when you get to tell somebody I'm not racist?
Mhm.
Although we hear that all the time here in Minnesota, I'm not racist. So you get the sheriff come up. Well, we talked to him and he said it wasn't racial. It wasn't racial. It was sexual. It's like,
He said he was a sex addict. Well, I didn't
right,
know that sex addicts kill people. I didn't. I
yeah,
didn't.
yeah. Well,
I mean, I've talked to sex addicts. I've been a counselor for sex addicts. None of them were homicidal.
but the thing is okay. You're a sex addict, but you went to a specific place
Right.
where you done sexualize a certain group of women, right? And and first thing come out your mouth, which you ain't. And
Right.
and then you get the sheriff, the white sheriff, who is
No.
your spokesman. Now, I mean, damn, like uh
Mhm.
uh uh. I remember when they were standing up there and he was saying that, and the 2 brothers on the other side looked over at him like, did he really say that? And then, oh golly, and listening to my Asian brothers and sisters, and letting them tell their story, you know because sometimes we don't listen.
Mhm.
We want to throw our story into the mix. You need to listen to folks,
Mm.
right? We need to listen to folks. And then we got the fact that not only is it racial, it's also gender based, right? and
Right.
and and then up until this time, before this, you have, ever since our last president was putting basically a mark on Asian people in terms of the coronavirus, right? This made
Mhm.
it okay. And unfortunately, I have to say this, when I've seen some of the videos of older Asians being attacked on the street and that kind of stuff, it ain't just white folks doing it to them,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And see, and only in America. that you have this whole mixture of this racist institution that even affects other races when it comes to other races. You know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
so and so when you listen to the Asian brothers and sisters, what the stereotype of um the model minority, right?
Mhm.
And the only reason they, the model minority, basically, they go to work, they work hard, and they don't really cause no trouble. And I listened to a few of the interviews, and it's like when we think about racial trauma, one of the signs of racial trauma is can be down to the inability to actually advocate for yourself
Sure.
and,
Mhm.
and and silence you, right? We
Right.
don't we the system is so racist, and it's like if you it's almost gives some groups, racial groups, the idea, as long as I don't act black, we good.
Right.
I might be safe,
Mhm.
right? Or as one young lady said, well, I don't want to compare what my experience been to African Americans who were enslaved,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a voice.
Right. And that your experience is invalid towards what we're talking about. If we're talking
Right,
about eliminating racism.
right, right.
Mhm.
And that's the insidious piece that don't get talked about, how it affects us all in these interesting kind of ways. And like I said, when you look at when we look at and talk about race in our society, even the way we talk about it is almost like a trauma response, all or nothing, black or white, and then
Right.
everything else falls in the middle, you know.
Yep.
And so it's
Agree.
like if I keep my head down, they won't remember I'm here.
Right.
Okay, but the problem with that, if I keep my head down, I remember I'm here. When something does happen to me, they still act like I ain't here or it ain't important.
Mhm.
Because think about this. Again, we've been talking about the attacks on the Asian community for a year.
Mhm.
Now you have all this; these folks lose their lives. Now all of a sudden, everybody wants to pay attention.
Mhm.
So racial trauma is a difficult thing, and especially in a society that wants to deny race.
Mhm.
There's this quote by one of the individuals I follow who does work around this, Dr. Kenneth Hardy, and he quotes, "Racial oppression is a traumatic form of interpersonal violence which can lacerate the spirit, scar the soul, and puncture the psyche."
Mhm. Yeah. And that's where we are collectively, um, in what I call racial dynamics, because these are all dynamics, whether it's white to Asian, Asian to indigenous, indigenous to black. Like we are still interplaying in this arena of white supremacy and racism
Right.
amongst each other, and we're all kind of figuring out our own method and lane to surviving and go and trying to thrive through it. And what unfortunately ends up happening is we start to have these racism Olympics to see who's being abused better than others. And I think that as Black folks, we've been abused in such a unique way that we feel like our abuse is the only abuse that is valid, and that is awful because we have, like I've said several times on this podcast and others, we've developed culture around being oppressed. So if we are no longer oppressed, we have to develop a counterculture to that, which means we have to give up identity, which is something that many of us don't want to do. And we have this, I don't want to get too deep, but I feel like we have kind of an addiction to whiteness. If whiteness did not exist, who would African American people be? That is something that we really need to think about. If there was no white supremacy, who would we be? How would we be? And are we striving towards being in that place, or are we expecting to be under white domination forever? Because white folks can disappear. This is something that can happen genetically. And then what? And then you have to deal with the other ethnic groups that are around. And if we are only if we're only evaluating our existence based on what white people are doing or their existence, we are going to end up ultimately being lost in the sauce when it comes to ethnicity. And I think that that's something that many of us aren't considering. Um, and that's why when we have conversations like this past week, we have incidents where Asian women are targeted and murdered by white folks. Black people are like, look, that ain't my. Hey, I'm bending, I ain't in it. Like that ain't my struggle. And it's like that if that's gonna be how we're gonna be, we're never going to be able to be out of being dominated or be out of coexisting with other ethnicities. We can't have this all or nothing approach to dealing with racism, white supremacy, and racial trauma. In this thing, and many people may not be familiar with this term, but if you're in the social service or even the education field, you've heard the term BIPOC, which stands for Black,
Yes.
Indigenous People of Color.
Right.
In the BIPOC group, all BIPOC people do not experience racism the same,
No.
even though we are lumped into this group together. And if we're not willing to have conversations about how other people experience racism and even to a certain extent display it,
Right.
then how are we going to grow and move forward? But all we want to focus on is how we've been victimized by white folks. And I think that that's a dangerous place to be in to the growth and development of Black people.
And it's interesting you bring up that piece around the term BIPOC. I in some of my presentations I actually talk about that, and there's been articles recently that talk about is that the best term,
Mm-hmm.
right? But but we got to understand who came up with the term, and that whole kumbaya, how you want to group groups of folks together and that kind of stuff. Which when you sometime when you use the term BIPOC and say, for example, we talk about the Black community, and it sometimes get used as a defensive tool to not say Black.
Right.
Okay. And you talk about we talk about Black Lives Matter, and as soon as you throw, and it was interesting, as soon as you throw Black in the equation, all of a sudden folks freak out, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like pro-Black does not mean anti-white,
Mm-hmm.
especially at me being a Black man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially me wanting to be responsible and helping my community deal with their issues on top of the issue of dealing with racism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the articles I read from a young lady, Asian young lady, she says, "Sometimes I feel like I can't even use the term BIPOC because people think that we're so close to white that we don't even have a place in there."
Right. Yep.
So, and again, you know, the thing is so um, um, do we want they're having their Pacific experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they should be able to talk about their experience, without automatically everybody want to jump into the same experience,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But but a lot of think about it. A lot of approaches in our society, when it comes around race, when we respond to some of these things, when we respond, a lot of our responses are lazy responses. We want these easy responses to race, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, that's that whole idea of 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 the discomfort, the privilege of not being uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And we see it when we do the work in the community, and especially around we've seen it a lot, especially around funding and grants, and I mean I've literally worked on read grants on a particular issue, and all of the information uh, to justify the grant was statistics on Black people,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Grant shows up, and the Black folks get very little of the money. It just goes everywhere.
Right. It's
So
the
you're
same
going
thing.
to,
Same thing
huh?
happened with affirmative action. It's the
Right?
same thing.
you know, I mean,
It's the
you
same
use
thing.
all of the horrible numbers, and then and so why wouldn't we? When you always are dealing with a people from a negative standpoint, think about that.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, think about it. We have to use all of the negative numbers to get the help we need, and then we still don't get the help.
Mhm.
So why wouldn't folks be stuck in that kind of victimy kind of spot, right?
Right. Right. But at
Why wouldn't?
some point, you got to move beyond just being a victim. I mean, you
Yeah,
are a victim of the system, but you can't stay stuck in a victim mentality. How do you grow from there? How do you
yeah,
do
but
anything different?
it's hard when it's coming at you so many different ways,
Hmm.
right? You know, I've seen it happen where worked with organizations and I don't play victim, and the organization don't want to deal with me.
Hmm.
Like I ain't you know not that I care, because I've learned to live my life that way and be good with me. But I can't bow my head for you to treat me like a human, to want to be dealing with me, or
Hmm.
I have to bow my head for you to even, and I don't even see that as being treated like a human being if I got to bow my head to
Right.
get your attention,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Or I got to be less proud to get your attention when we all already know that it's we already know what the disparities. Use their numbers, because they
Hmm.
do they research us to death, so
Everything.
they got all kind of numbers,
Which,
right?
yeah, I'm gonna come
We-
back to that point in a second. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, you got all kind of numbers. You got all the evidence under the sun, right? But I got to bow my head, prostrate myself to get you to do what to get you to help me, or give me, or at least try to uh 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 get my share. If some people say, "What do you mean your share?" Well, I'm gonna use that word. Get my share of the help or support that I work just as hard as getting, right? Um, and I've done all, and on top of that, I've probably done all of what I'm supposed to do and then some. And then you still want me to bow my head and in my own little modern yes, sir,
Mhm.
way, right? And skin and grin, in that kind of thing, and still might not get what I need, or
Mm.
then when I get it, I got to act a certain way when I get it for me to be able to continue.
Yeah.
Please,
Yeah.
you know, uh, and that, it's just, so there's so all these different, when you talk about racial trauma, all these different ways it affects you, right? It's as one definite description of, it's like carrying the weight of the world all the time, right? When you
Yeah.
walk in the room, because you know how we're raised, you're representing the people,
Right.
representing the family and all like that. Well, some days I don't want to represent the people.
Right. Hmm.
I'm just trying to represent me. I'm having a hard time representing me. I can't represent all people. And on top of that, all black people, because on top of that, I don't agree with all black people, first of all.
Right.
And that's
Hmm.
okay.
Hmm.
That's really okay. But it just sucks the life out of folks, right? And so you got these extremes again. When I think of extremes, I think of trauma, all or nothing, where you just kind of duck and dodge and hope they don't see you,
Right.
right? you know uh you think about, there's always been this tension on the border. I remember, I don't know how, what, 10 years ago, maybe less, when you had Latinas working in people's houses, cutting their
Hmm.
grass, taking care of their babies. They weren't seen as that much of a problem. You had your issues, but when it came out in the data that that whiteness was going to be overtaken, oh my God, they lost
Yeah.
their mind. Right? How do you go
Mhm.
from another again, who gets to define who's the model minority? Because how
Mhm.
that's the other thing I think is difficult for us as black folks. Uh, the white system loves throwing other people in our faces. You know,
Sure.
why can't you be like them? I remember I was doing a lecture on I'm doing a lecture on historical trauma in the black community, and at the end, this woman raised her hand. Now these are folks who are volunteers to go into prison. Okay, I'm speaking to
Mhm.
them, and it's like prisons around the country full of black folks, right? They do the little volunteers gonna help the little black folks and that kind of stuff. And the woman says, I like Somalis. Why can't y'all act like them?
Mhm.
It's like,
Mhm.
you didn't hear nothing I said, did you?
Mhm.
You know? And so which ends up causing tension between folks. We're talking about tension between black and black folks, right?
Right. Right.
Um, so I look at our Latina brothers and sisters. Like I said, there's always been this tension about who, even within that group. And when I was doing more work at the hospital among Latinas, in terms
Mhm.
of how America responds to Latinas, right?
Mhm.
Um, um, the browner Latinas versus the lighter skinned Latinas. So we
Mhm.
have all of this different, and that colorism is an issue within our own community, right?
Mhm.
It's just this toxic kind of continuous thing that this, like I said, eat at our souls, when all we want to do is be able to take care of our families
Right.
and love them and be loved,
Right.
you know, or better yet, if nothing else, leave us alone. And you can't even have that happen. Mind your own
Mhm.
business.
Mhm.
Out of clear blue. Now you're calling a whole group of people out behind a pandemic.
Mhm.
Can't even keep your head down without getting in trouble. And
Yep.
and again, there's folks who will listen to this. Well, if you don't like it here, go someplace. Where am I gonna go?
This is your home.
This is my home. In some cases, this is my home more than yours. I'm a
Right.
descendant of slaves. Like, look, we
Yep.
want to talk about whose home it is.
Right.
You
Which
know,
is
so
That's a colonizer response anyway. Just go somewhere else and set up shop and good luck over there. You could go over there and
we can
tell
talk
something.
about colonizer. If you didn't brought your butt over here, or you didn't, and it was like, okay,
Hmm.
or
But
didn't take my folks.
right, right. Before we continue, we should take off the StreamYard banner. So right above Val's comment in the comments where it's blue, click that blue, and then that'll disappear. Just click on that blue. There you go. There we go. Yeah. So the point that you have made that I wanted to come back to, because I think it's profound and very important when we're talking about racial trauma, is this whole idea how white people, um, I think how white people research things. One of the things I think is one of our misconceptions due to being victimized by this system and feeling like white people don't love us is that we have this idea that they don't know us. And
Right,
our response to that is, if you just got to know me, if we just built a relationship, and you see this all throughout diversity, equity, inclusion work. And I caution that. And I say, white people study everything. They know different types of paints. They know different types of sands and rocks at the bottom of the deepest waters in this planet. And you think they haven't studied black folks? Like they they know your response to things, and this is why you get dished the things that you get dished out, because they get you probably better than you get yourself sometimes, and they definitely get us more than we think that they do. It's not about love; it's about control. And that's why I talk about that. What I was talking about earlier about the whole victim behavior, victim mindset thing, is if you stay there, you're easily controlled because I can dictate how your behaviors are going to be what you get. Like one of the things that you talked about earlier with the client, you said, he wasn't even focusing on the Chauvin trial. He was trying to get that stimmy. He was trying to get that stimulus check. That he was
Right.
trying to get that next dollar so he
Right.
can keep on existing day by day, because
Right.
that stimulus check, no matter how much it is, if it ain't millions, it ain't gonna be life changing. It's
Right.
gonna be life supporting for the
Right.
moment. And that's where, for black folks, for us to stay under control, that's where many of us, that's where the attention needs to be, is just you get just a little bit you just get a little bit, just enough for you to survive and move on to the next thing. But if you stay in that kind of ideal, and this is just in the context of finances, it can be in other areas as well. If you stay in that survival base, survival mode kind of mentality, you will always be controlled, because you will always be seeking something to kind of give you that jolt, that hit, to make sure that you have security for that moment. And that's a dangerous place to be in.
Oh, yeah. Well, the term I use for that is survival stress management,
Right.
living in the moment, whatever feels
Yep.
good in the moment.
Yep.
Right. Um, um, and when you live like that, it gives you a view of the future, right? Um, and the key is, how do I participate in my future,
Right.
right? And how do I act accordingly in my present to better
Right.
respond to my future too,
Mhm.
right? It's like I might have justifiable rage, which is a side of racial trauma, that you get so angry
Mhm.
for being from being discounted, being devalued, and the term is, you end up with after a while you got this wound of rage,
Yeah.
right? And you respond from that rage standpoint, right? And in so, and if you only respond from that rage standpoint, you will have a chance of missing out on the outcome you really wanted.
Right. What's happening?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think, really, I think survival stress and management is the glue to racism, white supremacy. If we stay in that mode, that space, we'll never grow beyond where we're at, because we're always just seeking a hit for the moment. It doesn't give us an opportunity to thrive collectively. And I think that's one of the things that we have to learn how to manage, because it is a trauma response, and that's
Right.
part of the healing work. We have
Right.
to learn how to manage that and not let that be the sole way that we cope with the trauma that we've experienced.
Right. 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 And the whole thing of, we was talking about the research and the studies. Are you familiar with the Kerner report?
The Kerner report, maybe.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, the Kerner report was, Johnson had what was the other report that Johnson requested?
And
To
it's
say,
Ben Johnson,
yeah, uh,
the Negro Family by Moynihan.
yeah,
That
Pat
report?
Moynihan report. Yeah,
Yeah.
so some people are familiar with that one. 2 years later, there was another one. The Kerner report was supposed to answer the question, why was there riots? Okay, why was there riots, and how do we not make them happen again, or keep them from happening again? Right? And one of the answers, they didn't like the answers of the Kerner report. Now they paid for the report, and the answer this validated with you. You didn't have to have no research to do. You could have just went out and asked people, black folks in the community. They could have told you, right? They could have told you that you have two systems, black, one white, and they chastise the media that basically spent all this time keeping systems and reporting on systems in a way to keep this uh, racist system going, right? Because it was like, okay, so if you continually not invest in communities and continually over police the communities, basically reports that this is what you get, and they pay for it. But did you hear about it? Did it change legislation?
No, I am actually familiar with this report. They they did a follow up in 2018. Ain't shit changed. It got worse. They did a follow up. Yeah, they did a follow. It's funny because it's so damn sad. Because if you look at the coroner report, commission's report, and you look at the Negro family, which has been, the PC version of it's called the Moynihan report.
Right.
The predictions in both of those reports of what could happen if policy and infrastructural changes were not implemented, most of them came true, and a lot of them are worse
Right.
now than they predicted would be then. And that, to me, that's scary because we are acting like everything is all good when it comes to the advancement of Black American people, and it is not. And our response to the things that are not good is our lives matter, and it's to love us and hugging and dancing and singing in the middle of the street. This is not going to get the job done for us, man. Like, we need policy and structure and healing that's not just this feel good objective stuff that we can see. Like, there's some serious things happening in our communities that I'm afraid we might not have a Black community in the next 30 to 40 years. I think we're going to end up blending into other communities, and there ain't going to be a lot of Black folks.
Well, yeah. Or if we do, not the most healthiest community will be left. You know, but thing is when you really study Joy DeGrew's work, one of the things that she says to deal with post-traumatic slave disorder or syndrome is not simply to treat uh, or use clinical remedies, but rather requires social change in individuals
Yep.
as well as institutions
Yep.
that continue to contribute to the inequality and injustice towards descendants of enslaved Africans.
Right. Yep. And I completely agree. And she's brilliant.
Yes,
Mhm.
right. I mean, and you can't do either one of them when outside of your community they deny that information when they have it, and inside the community we're so worried about what folks think about us, won't even admit that we've been harmed,
Mm.
and won't even deal with the harm straight up, and won't even deal with the outcomes of the harm. It's like when the mother on my radio show asked the question, what is going on with young men to the point where they want to take each other's lives?
Yeah. Hmm.
You know, and if and if we wasn't so far into the show, because it would take a show for me to talk about that, right? Because I can, folks might not necessarily like what I might say, but I can,
Yeah.
you know, and it's oh my goodness, it's just hard um, um, when we're doing this kind of work, right?
Yeah.
And,
Hmm.
and so, um, and then did we give a definition for racial trauma?
We didn't. You got one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Racial trauma, a race based stress refers to an event of danger related to real or perceived experience of racial discrimination. These can include threats of harm, injury, humiliation, shaming events, and witnessing the harm of others. So we don't have to experience it.
Right.
And due to this racism, right?
Mhm.
and we find that that's linked to anxiety, depression, suicidal ideations, and then we also, talk about one of the responses to that is that wounds of rage, and we
Mhm.
know rage is one of the real complex emotions, right?
Right. Right.
And what's so funny, well, I don't know if it's funny, but what's so interesting about that in doing the work I do is how many black men get sent to anger management classes, and they don't seem to work.
Right. Mhm.
you know well, you're just angry, baby. Well, you ain't dealing with the core of the rage. I remember when there was a time, and there's still organizations that really won't let you do this, to talk about race. I remember when programs would literally tell black folks, when they would bring up the issue around racism, that was just an excuse
Mhm.
in treatment centers.
Mhm. Yep.
So,
Yeah.
um,
And
yeah,
that mentality still there. Even in this climate that we're in now, where everybody is forced to talk about racism, even if you don't want to.
right,
You're being forced to, especially in your employment situation. So it's something that we definitely need to understand the definition of it and understand how it affects our well-being, because that definition that you gave for racial trauma is what many of us are experiencing on this Chauvin trial. As they pick these jurors, people are reliving those events and other events. When you see what happened with the Asian women that got murdered by that white man, like you are being traumatized by just viewing those things and hearing about those things, and then having to talk about them and discuss them. And even if you avoid the news cycles and you're not paying attention to those things, for many people, they're dealing with it at work. So they're having anti-racism meetings at work, and they're joining affinity groups, and they're getting re-racialized and forced to talk about racism in spaces that they traditionally have not. One more thing I want to say about that, because this is something that you and myself have probably been getting more calls doing, is this anti-racism trainings and work and stuff like that.
I get the
And
call, but they don't call me back.
well, I don't know what to tell you about that. But one of the things that I think is important for us to understand is that the work, when it comes to anti racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, the work for white people is different than the work for non white folks. It's two different types of work in anti racism. And the work for white folks is one, undoing their anti racism practices. And I think for us, especially for black folks, I don't want to speak for all the people that got lumped into the BIPOC category, but definitely for black folks, our work is really undoing the internalized racism that we've I don't want to say bought into. That's been forced upon. We've been socialized and cultivated with. That's two different types of work. And so I've been seeing here and hearing a lot more in these spaces where a lot of the non-white staff in these spaces don't want to do some of the activities and things that
Right.
are being asked of,
Exactly.
because it doesn't apply to them, because there's two different types of work.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we have to understand. This is not a one size fits all for racism, because we experience racism and racial trauma differently. And it's okay if there's more than one type of work happening, but
Right.
white folks get uncomfortable with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and they always been afraid of us being in the room by ourselves. What they talking about, right? Like they always,
Oh man.
if you went, if you what you got to worry about? If you ain't so bad, what you got to worry about? What we talking about, right? But again, people might think that sometimes it's on contradiction. But first of all, we create safe spaces to talk about race for everyone, right? It's like it always tickles me. It always tickles me when I go in organizations and they want to use the term safe space, and the look on their face when I said there is no such thing as a safe space for Black folks in most places. Because again, what is a safe space? So my supervisor says we have a safe space, but my coworker is doing all kind of stuff to sabotage my safe space, right? Or how is it a safe space when you tell me it's a safe space, but nothing changes? What's safe about that? right? Um, or what's safe about when you going when you're asking me about what another person is doing who happens to be black,
Right.
and a matter
Hmm.
of fact, what's safe for a person who is not black but a person of color, right?
Hmm.
Because sometimes we want to get and I can understand why you'll be upset when you done talk to your other person of color, your partner, and they agree that everything that's going on has happened, but they might not speak up like you want them to speak up. But some
Right.
cultures they just not like that,
Right.
right? Some cultures don't even speak up enough for themselves sometimes, so that they can kind of fit in.
Right.
That's the ugliness and the toxicness of this whole issue around racism, right?
Hmm.
And so, this thing around racial trauma is something that it's one of those traumas you can't get away from by ignoring
Right.
as much as you might try.
Right. Yeah. Nope. Can't get it. You can't. I think that that's been one of the luxuries and privileges when it comes to whiteness, is that you've been able to not have to have these conversations. And I think now with the additional social pressure to have them, that's really causing a lot of frustration for many white folks. And I think it's causing some frustration for us as non-white folks too, because now we're forced to talk about stuff that we've been trying to avoid, duck and dodge in these spaces, and now it's here. And then the response to it being here and how white people are responding, um, is kind of not in all situations, but you'll notice that there's some patronizing pieces, there's some coddling, there's a lot of defensiveness, there's a lot of these uncomfortable dynamics to the place where you have to make your living and pay your bills. Like that's a huge struggle for some folks. So it's just something that we need to think about when we talk about racial trauma, is as we continue to deal with racism and deal with white supremacy, how do we do that in these spaces that we traditionally haven't had to talk about these
Yeah, when I was thinking about what kind of analogy I would use, and one of them is a dysfunctional family,
things?
right? And you have them different. You got the model child, the scapegoat, the oldest child, and the behaviors that go on along in there, and that's how they function.
Hmm.
And I think America's kind of like that, this dysfunctional family, you know, the child that just gets ignored, set aside all along what they call it, the middle child,
Hmm.
and then you got the child who gets all the attention because he's acting up, but he ain't getting the love. He's just getting a bunch of unnecessary dysfunctional attention, and then you got the one who wants to keep peace in the family and not suffering, but keeps their suffering silent. It's like America's like that,
Right.
you know and then you threw the bomb of COVID in the middle of all that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So all of this stuff we're dealing with now is not new. Is this that it's all this coming down all at the same time, and it's not in and we finding it difficult to ignore those pieces,
Right.
you know, and that's a challenge,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And that's a challenge. But when you all boil it down, one of the core things, and I seen this on a newscast today. The brother said the core to all of these different issues is race, whiteness, right? And
Right.
lo and behold, what was another person's response? Well, it really is. We just got to deal with the mental health of men. Because once you use the word whiteness, oh man, it's like,
Yeah.
and it's always interesting how when white men do stuff, we want to talk about mental health,
Because they can't just not do these things. They have to be mentally insane.
right? And I might be wrong about this, but dude, it's almost like he knew what the script was supposed to be
Mhm.
when he got stopped.
Mhm.
And I mean, think about that. I mean, how often did you would have that type of script right off the top of your head,
Premeditated the whole thing.
right? And you
Mm.
done cleaned your computer out, because now well, we ain't finding nothing on his computer, and his friend, said this and this and this. But we cannot ignore the fact that he went specifically to 3 Asian massage parlors.
Right. Mhm.
Folks of color and black folks and everybody look like, well, what do you mean?
Right. Yeah, you got to protect whiteness. You can't tarnish it at that level, right? You can't. And I use tarnish deliberately because that's a term of when you when you take something that's seen as pure and then it gets unpure when you put a dark piece of something on it, it gets tarnished. But you can't
Yeah,
do that with whiteness, right?
right,
So we're gonna other this person and make them mentally insane, and that's why they're doing that. Not because they're white. We know that racism is a problem, but that's not because this is how white people think. He's mentally ill,
right.
and he had a bad day. Don't forget that part. He also had a bad
Yeah, let me have a bad day like that.
day.
One of these screens will be empty. It's like, I come to you today. It will be just me. Unfortunately, my co-host is no longer with us because
He had
he
a
had
bad.
a bad day.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, come on now.
You
That's a
know, but I don't know. I don't know.
so there is a question in the chat.
Okay.
That we could probably answer before we wrap up from C Pope. And the question is, what about states wanting to give $25,000 for reparations for slavery? Money for the moment? Question mark. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the thing is, I guess we would argue about how much money is enough, right? And and is money the best route to go when we're talking about any kind of reparations, right? I do believe that there reparations is called for. I do believe that, right? I think it need to be more well thought out. Um, in terms of, because I remember when I first heard reparations when I was younger, it was all about money, right? But we know that the issues in our community is bigger than just money, right? I mean, money would have to be involved, but it's got to be thought out so that you don't want to have reparations that don't have long term sustainable outcomes
Right.
if you're going to do that,
Right.
right? Um, Otherwise, you end up doing the same thing you do with programs now. The 5-year grants. We give you a 5-year grant, and after the 5-year grant, oh well, you know, adios, you know, and you don't have no sustainability plan, even for stuff that works, right? So, and again, we know reparations by whatever name it has been is not has been part of American history. We know that. Um, but I think the other piece, I think what's when you talk about reparations, what's so painful, one of the biggest pains for America is if they gave a reparations is less about the money, but it's more about that tarnish of the whiteness.
Right. Right. Hmm.
They're admitting
Of the
the
wrong.
wrong
Right. Right.
because we know that admitting uh the wrong is more because see once they put the money behind it, that's the full admitting. It's like I think didn't Clinton apologize or something when he was in office or some kind of thing like that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
well, no, but when they put their money where their mouth at, you know,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you know what I'm saying. So the admitting part is you know, it's like, you know, even though everybody and mama know it ain't you know, it's tarnished, you know, they might be in emotional denial, but they know, they it's tarnished. But that, I think that's, it would be more painful to America, uh, uh, and that whole thing. Yeah, the that whole ideal of America and independence and all the other kind of stuff to go along with that. So
Mm. Mhm.
you know,
Absolutely.
so
Okay. Well, there's the answer. There's no other questions in the comments. So you think this is a good place to wrap it up for today?
I'm
Any final
good.
thoughts on racial trauma?
Yeah, yeah, but again, I want to, let all of my Asian brothers and sisters in there that we're in, because we're there for them, and and for folks who are, understand that not all people of color are experiencing this thing called race similarly,
Right.
and we need to be able to hear them, and support them. We might not always understand everything, but again, if you are sincere about this movement towards equality and understanding, you got at least got to open up your ears, with compassion and care.
Absolutely. And with that, folks, we're going to wrap up another installment of the Hillen Brothers podcast. I am your co host, Brandon Jones. He is Sam Simmons. We will be back next Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Time. Please share the video if you found it constructive and subscribe to the YouTube channel, Healing Brothers. All right. Take care.